Hello, Docker All Hands. I'm Josh Thurman. I'm the co-founder of Yuffix. I organize our open source. I used to be a Navy SEAL squashing bad guys. Now I squash commits out of my garage. I'm really excited to be here. We got a great topic. Today we're going to talk about going from compose to previews. So it's taking something that we're familiar with running locally at Docker Compose, making a few adjustments, and setting up a continuous previews capability for our entire team. It's going to be pretty cool. Thanks for tuning in. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, title slide complete. Okay, first let's talk about why do I want continuous previews? There's a lot of benefits here. I've drilled it down to three big ones. One, you can begin testing earlier. Okay, we're talking about pre-merge as features are being developed. Really easy to spin up preview environments that are shareable. They're in the cloud. Okay, I can get feedback from my peers, from the product team, and whoever's serving my QA function, right? So I can go ahead and do my iterations in a pre-merge step where it can happen real fast. And the biggest benefit here, I'm going to keep my dirty code out of main, right? So all the adjustments I need to make to my feature branches, I'm going to do that early before I get them merged. So that later I don't have problems, right? So I haven't merged a broken feature, which I may have to go pull out later. And also, if I have to find it, it could be difficult, right? Maybe I just merged like several features and I don't really know where the bug was introduced. Second major benefit is I'm going to accelerate my iterative feedback loops, right? So as development work is getting done, it's getting pushed up to your preview environment, and someone else can be checking that, confirming, hey, this is good to go. This is the feature as intended. And the third is I can simplify my overall testing process, right? Instead of doing batch testing of pushing a bunch of features at once, getting all those merged and then going through them all, I'm going to do them one at a time, breaking them down into small bites, which of course will make it a little bit easier, a little bit more discreet. I've got a separation of concerns going on there. So that's why. And now let's define, what do I mean by continuous previews? That's a new term. So I'm going to go ahead and just read the definition. Continuous previews are an automation-enabled method or capability by which in-progress development branches, known as topic branches, are continuously deployed in a dynamic cloud environment and are available for collaborative review and testing at a secure URL. By this method, iterative feedback is accelerated and testing is conducted in a logical sequence where topic branch functionality testing is completed prior to integration testing. So first you CP and then you CI/CD. Okay, that's great, Josh, but let's get this framed a little bit further, right? So we'll do some compare and contrast here for a few slides. Let's talk about previews versus standard deployments. I could have titled this slide preview deployments versus standard deployments. Previews are a type of deployment, but they serve a different purpose and have some different characteristics than what we typically think of as a standard deployment. So in my table here, previews are ephemeral and they have a purpose-driven lifecycle. So they're meant to be stood up for a short amount of time to test a specific feature, and then they go away. They're not long-lived. They're meant to work at the feature branch level. So in a pre-merge situation, and they have a preview URL. So something that is generated dynamically per preview deployment in an on-demand test environment. A standard deployment, those are persistent and long running. Those are representative of environments you might deploy to an environment like production, staging, or QA. Those run effectively all the time. They're post-merge, right? So I'm deploying main or develop, and they have a static URL, something like app.qa.acme.com, right, as the QA environment for acme.com. Okay, so now let's break it down a little bit further. We're gonna talk about previews versus continuous previews. What's the difference? So a preview is something that is initiated by an engineer, okay, ad hoc, right? So it's initiated typically with a command. So locally, we might be familiar with, I'm gonna run a Docker Compose up to get my local environment running, and then I'm gonna run a Docker Compose down to tear that down. And typically I use them for individual testing on my local machine. They can also be cloud-based. You may be familiar with Docker Compose and the ECS integration, right? That is effectively a Docker Compose up, but the containers are running in ECS as opposed to my local machine. So a continuous previews, this is a system, okay, and a methodology and a capability. It's a team-focused system for previewing. It's intended for sharing with your team for feedback and approval. And before I mentioned, who am I going to be sharing with this? My teammates, maybe my engineering manager, probably the product team or people on the product team, and certainly whoever is serving as your QA function. They have a trigger-based lifecycle, and these on-demand environments that host your preview, your continuous previews, those are initiated and deleted via events that are delivered by webhooks. Okay, let's talk about CP as it relates to Agile. Okay, the big lower loop, the colorful loop there is what we're all pretty familiar with. Feature gets designed, it gets developed, it gets integrated, it gets tested, gets iterated through that cycle, that big loop, and eventually gets launched out to the customer. Continuous previews is a sub-cycle of the Agile cycle. And so it's part of the development effort, and it enables teams to iterate quickly because you develop a little bit and then you preview, you get some feedback, and you develop a little more, and you have a really tight feedback loop, ultimately helping your team accelerate your overall feature releases. Okay, let's dive even deeper on what the CP loop looks like. CP for continuous previews, of course. So you're gonna start with your ticketing system, and then that's where the feature is written up. And then you're gonna check out your Git branch, start working on it. Automation is gonna be employed to deploy that branch or maybe set of branches to your infrastructure. And then to finish out the loop, that preview URL is going to get delivered back to my ticketing system or my collaboration software. And that's where the work can happen. Feedback is provided and the iteration can keep going until the feature is complete. So let's talk quickly about CP and branching. So showing a GitHub branching strategy here. If I check out a topic branch, again, I can continuously preview that. Right? And so at this first iteration, it got developed a little bit. Again, this is for the full stack, front end, back end, all the services, any service that can be containerized. And I get feedback from my teammate or QA, hey, this is not quite right. Make some adjustments. Second iteration, okay, a few more tweaks to this. By the third iteration, hey, this feature is good to go. Let's set this up and let's get it merged. Okay, so how do I get to continuous previews, right? It's the beginning of the talk I talked about starting with Docker Compose configuration. So this is a quick intro here. We're going to start with Docker Compose, and then we're going to add a few parameters to that Compose configuration to enable our continuous previews. So let's take a look at this snapshot of a Docker Compose segment for the Vote app. So the Vote app has got 6 containers. I'm showing just 2 here. Let's talk about what is absolutely required. The thing that is absolutely required here is you have to designate an ingress. So this is different than our local environment, right? So I'm in the cloud here for my preview, and I'm going to have an ingress service. So I need to designate which container is going to receive traffic flowing through that service and which port is it listening on. So I've got to do that. Now that is the only thing that's absolutely required. Now for other capabilities or features, I'm going to have to designate some things, but let's go from top to bottom now. So this is my vote component of the Vote app. And here, as I'm adjusting it to run as a preview, I'm gonna have to define the build context. So it's gonna be pulling from this repo and this branch, and it's gonna have this Docker file. So if I wanna build, I have to set the context for the preview. Now, something I also may have to define is resources, memory resources. So I don't have to do that locally, but I'm going to have to do it when I'm allocating cloud resources. So the default here is 125 megabytes. So you don't have to do it if your containers only need that much memory. In this case, this vote component needs 250 megabytes. So I have designated that here. I can look down at the results element here, and I already talked about defining the build context, but you'll notice I did not designate the memory here again because it defaults to 125. Okay, and then let's look at the continuous preview element here. So this is a superset of your Docker Compose. So something that is not included. And here's where I'm going to define the policies by which my previews will be created and destroyed. So deploy preview when pull request is open, that's set to true. Delete preview when pull request is closed, that is also set to true. I'm going to share to GitHub. And then I'm going to also designate here, I'm going to delete the preview after a certain amount of time. That's so I don't have a mushroom farm of previews out there running if I've got a pull request open for a long period of time. And I can set this to any hourly integer all the way up to 720 hours. Okay, that's the quick overview. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Docker Compose versus Yuffix Compose. So Yuffix Compose is both a subset and a superset of Docker Compose. So the standard Docker Compose elements that are included in Yuffix Compose, so we've got services, image, build, configs, and environment. And then the elements that are not included in Docker Compose are things like continuous previews, event triggers, ingress, and memory requirements. Okay, so let's get off the slides and get right to looking at a demo of this capability. So what I'm going to show is the Vote app. I'm going to set up a continuous preview of a Vote app from a Vote app that would run locally from Docker Compose. So Vote app, I've got 6 total containers. I'm using nginx here to simulate a production load balancer, and traffic is generally going to get routed from nginx to the voting app, memory cached here in Redis. Worker's going to see that, pass it to the where it's going to write to the Postgres DB, and then those results will get displayed here at the results app component. And nginx is going to handle some traffic routing for me. All right, so let's get to a Docker Compose that I would be running that works locally. Okay, so I'm going to go through and decompose this compose, and then I'm going to take this and I'm going to create a compose that's meant to run in a Yuffix preview environment. So first, let's just look at our services. So the first 3 listed here, these are Docker off-the-shelf official images. So I'm pulling this content straight out of Docker Hub, and let's see how these are defined. So I've got nginx here, and okay, the network mode, you'll notice I've designated host. So we're using the hosts network for every container. And I did this because that's the easiest way to get all my containers talking on localhost. Now, if you're going to do something like this, make sure you've got your firewall turned on. Otherwise, it would be insecure. So nginx, and I'm going to have to apply a configuration here that is helping me route traffic, as I showed in the diagram before. So that's here. And then I've got Redis. Okay, I'm just going to pull this Redis image. I've got Postgres version 9.6. Now here, I'm going to pass these environment variables. So I need a Postgres username and a Postgres password. So for a demo like this, this is totally acceptable. But if I need to do it securely, I could go to the Yuffix UI, I could upload my secrets and they could get applied at runtime. Separately, I could use something like sealed secrets or SOPs to encrypt those in my repo and then have them decrypted at runtime. Okay, now let's get into our custom. These are the components that we wrote, right? So the vote component, the worker component, and the result component. So this is going to get built from an adjacent folder, a repo in an adjacent folder. And I'm going to designate the port number here. The worker is in this folder. It's going to get built from here. The result is effectively designated just like the vote with a different port number. And then I've got this configuration here. It's going to be defined here so that I can call it up here and have that applied to nginx. Okay, so again, this is for my local environment. So I want to get this running in Yuffix. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy the raw contents and create a new file in my repo. Call this Docker Compose demo Yuffix, and we're just going to copy paste. Okay, good to go. All right, before I commit that, I'm going to go ahead and make the adjustments I need. So first off, Yuffix doesn't need me to designate the host here. So all the containers here are all sharing the same network stack in a Kubernetes pod. So I don't have to designate that here. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove that. Now I'm going to nginx. I am going to go ahead and specify latest, although that should be by default. And no change to the configs here. Actually, I'm going to delete. I'm just going to include the path here. That's something that's getting updated right now on Yuffix. Okay, I've got Redis. Yep, I don't need this. And I am going to go ahead and designate latest. All right, we got Postgres. Let's go ahead and get rid of this. This looks good. This looks good. Okay, now I'm going to be building these from my remote repository, right, on GitHub, my version control system. So what I'm going to do is I need to designate the build context. I'm going to copy and paste from another file here. Okay, so build context, I'm going to pull from this repo. It's going to use a Docker file to build. And once it gets deployed, the container is going to have a memory limit of 250 megabytes. Okay, for the worker, it also needs 250 megabytes. Again, similar, I'm going to have my context from I got the repo here with the Docker file. And then one more, the result. The result doesn't require a lot of memory. So I'm not going to give it 250 megabytes. I'm just going to go with the default of 125. Okay, and then I'll leave my configs the same here. So I actually have this vote.conf in my repository at the top level. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and commit that. My new file. Okay, good to go. Now let's jump into Yuffix. Okay, so I'm in the Yuffix UI and I'm using, so this is the Yuffix cloud hosted version. So open source always previews for free on Yuffix, and then it has a pretty generous free plan as well if you want to check it out. Of course, there's also the open source that is being released currently, and you can check that out as well on the Yuffix Cloud GitHub repo. So I set this project up before. Let's jump in. And what I need to do is add a specification, the Yuffix compose, for how I'm going to define my continuous previews. So let's add a new compose here. I've got this one in the worker repo, in the main branch. Okay, this is the file, and let's validate. Okay, oh, got an invalid compose file. So let's go back and see what I did wrong. Okay. Oh, okay. Completely forgot the most important part. So I've got to define an ingress, and then I need to define the continuous previews as well. So let me edit this a little more. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to copy from a previous file. I'll bring that in. Okay, so the ingress, as I mentioned before, absolutely required. The container receiving requests will be nginx, and it's listening on port 8080. And then my continuous preview policy. So I've got deploy preview when pull request is open, that's set to true. Delete when pull request is closed, set to true. And then, of course, we've got the time-based deletion option. I'm going to set this to something reasonable. Let's say I got 4 hours. My teammates and I are going to be collaborating on this. It's going to be getting QA'd. And then I'm going to share this to GitHub. That's going to be set to true. In future releases, this will have shared to Slack, shared to Jira, Microsoft Teams, Asana, other collaboration software. All right, but let's go ahead and commit those and see if we can actually have a valid compose. Okay, backend Yuffix app, and let's try again to validate my compose. Great, compose file is valid. So I'm going to save it here. Go. And now what I want to do is go trigger some previews based on some in-progress development. So in an example voting worker, I've been working on the double dogs branch. So as a functional change, I'm going to change it so when a user votes for dogs, they get 2 times the vote because dogs are awesome, and we want them to win the voting contest. So what I need to do is open the pull request so that my team, whoever I need to share this with, can take a look and review it. So new pull request. Okay, I want to compare double dogs in this repo back to main in this repo. And I'm going to create the pull request. Double dogs, create it. Okay, that's good to go. It's open. So Yuffix should recognize that. Oh, and it did. Very good. So it's going to kick off that preview deployment. It's going to take a couple minutes to build. So while that is working, let's go do another change to another component of this application. So I want to look at example voting result. For example, this might be a branch that maybe a teammate was working on, or maybe I was working on it. Not really important, but okay, color change, making a color change to the UI, so a front end change to one of the components in this application. And I'm going to open a pull request here. Okay, I'm going to compare color change back to main in this repository. Let's create it. Okay, good to go. That is open, and if you just see that, and there it is. So it's going to kick off that deployment as well. Okay, so while we're waiting on this, I did a little bit of work to set this up before we got started. So we are connected to Docker Hub and GitHub, authenticated there. I'm also connected to Azure Container Registry, Google Container Registry. I didn't just set up the AWS one, but not relevant for this demo. Okay, what else is relevant here? So let's dig in and we can get a better look at what's going on under the hood. So here's my activity log, and I can see these commit IDs from my different repos and branches. Those are building, now deploying. And then I can take a look at Redis, nginx, Postgres, again, pulling those from Docker Hub, and those are deploying. Over here, I can take a look at the individual containers and drill into, so I've got the build logs here, container logs. This isn't up yet. If it were, I'd be seeing some activity. And so those are going to keep, it's just going to keep working for me here. I'll, you know what, I'm just going to fast forward through this so we don't have to wait, 3 or 4 minutes for these apps to build and deploy. Okay, so these all finally deployed, and nginx, the last one, is waiting on some health checks, and it's up. So let's go check out our preview URL. Okay, it is up, and let's go vote. Okay, going to vote for dogs, of course. Okay, vote received here. And I should see, there we go. Dogs got the votes, and I voted once. It gave me 2 votes. Good to go. So this can be approved now and merged because I checked it out. Of course, I could do the same thing for my color change, but you guys get the point. I'm going to be able to review that there, and if it's good to go, I'll merge it. If not, I'll make a comment. So one other thing of note here, let's go into the PR, and Yuffix posted the preview URL, as well as if I need to check out what's going on in Yuffix, I could do that here. So the other thing I want to show is deleting. How do these, I don't want to have a mushroom farm. How are these getting deleted? So let's go ahead and look at the initial PR that we pulled on example voting worker. And I'm going to just close that out. Okay, so it closed, and my expectation is it should delete. Oh, there it went. Good to go. So that's all gone now. All right. Very good. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. That's really it. We took our compose file, we adjusted it to work for a Yuffix environment by adding Ingress, by adding some memory requirements, and by setting build context. We connected Yuffix to our compose, and then we did some continuous previews that were trigger based on open pull requests of in progress development for branches that we're working on. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will, to wrap it up here, I want to put my references. Let's get those up here. Okay, so in my talk, I referenced the Agile Manifesto, the Continuous Previews Manifesto, and if you want to check out the code, the open source is under in GitHub under Yuffix Cloud. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.